Welcome to the Qualitalks podcast. I'm the Kugler host, and my guest today is Daniel Milek. Daniel is a specialist in computer system validations, data integrity, and QMS systems. And today we're going to talk to him about data integrity. We're going to cover the basics of it and explain why it is really important right now. And we'll give tips on how companies should behave around it, what they should do for best compliance, and the biggest mistakes that companies do with data integrity so they can fix it. So let's get to it. Daniel, welcome to the Qualitalks podcast. I'm excited to have you on the show, and I want to talk to you about data integrity.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me, Jan. It's good to be here, and makes a change for having someone who actually wants to talk about data integrity for a
Yeah.
change.
So, why is that? Is it that people just don't understand it enough, and or they're a bit intimidated?
Well, where that statement comes from is really thinking about this. I work a lot with laboratory systems and to some extent production factory systems, and of course the users. From their perspective, they just want to use their software. They just want to use their uh, robot. They just want to use their machine in the factory. Data integrity, um, people are getting more training in pharma companies, and there are a lot more. The people working in those companies are a lot more aware of it and why it's important. But typically, um, for the users, it kind of gets in the way.
Mm.
It's a case of, can you just validate my system so I can use it as soon as possible? So the data integrity side of things, although people know it's important, it kind of slows things down. So people can be a bit reluctant when it comes to data
Mhm.
integrity, although
So,
that's changing.
do you think it's because they don't understand the importance of data integrity?
Partly, work pressures, um, with metrics on, production, how fast can we do things, um, how much throughput can we get through the factory, the laboratory, and so on. Anything that slows a business down can sit badly with people. But of course, working in the pharmaceutical industry, people know that they have to do things the right way. But yeah, I think it can get on people's nerves a little bit because it slows them down.
Yeah, so it's understandable. But why is data integrity so important, especially right now?
Well, really, it ultimately comes down to patient safety. We're working in an industry uh, that is manufacturing and selling medicines to people, and those medicines must be made correctly. It's really about making claims, isn't it? So, if I make a claim and say there is uh, X milligrams of paracetamol in this tablet, um, I have to be able to substantiate that claim. Just using that as a simple example. Whenever we make a claim about a medicinal product, we have to be able to be able to demonstrate and show evidence that that claim is true. With respect to data integrity, the production of that medicine, the testing of that medicine, and ultimately the release to market of that medicine must have data to support that product release that is secure, true, reliable, not easily tampered with. And so, really, yeah, patient safety.
And how does it look from a compliance side in the last years? Because as I know it, FDA and other agencies really uh, concentrate on it in the last years.
Yeah, I think what's happened is certainly over the last decade, there's been a lot more talk about data integrity. There are various reasons for that. we did see a increase in the production of medicinal products and testing of medicinal products from coming from Asia, particularly China and India. Going back a few years, we're getting a lot of quality audit findings, warning letters from the FDA, quite a big proportion of which were data integrity related. That was one part of what was going on. And then at the same time, the software packages that were becoming available, whether it's for factory, SCADA, HMI systems, PLCs, integrated complex factory systems, and then also in the laboratory as well. The software packages are becoming much more sophisticated with the features that allow, with some configuration, tailoring of settings, allow a really compliant workflow where data integrity, good practice is enforced rather than controlled by procedure, for example. So it was a combination of things: sophistication of software, more audits being conducted, more warning letters being issued, more audit findings with respect to deficiencies in data integrity. And that really created an environment where a lot of focus was placed on data integrity and has been in the last decade and certainly the last few years.
So you sent me a few slides that should be interesting. So we had one about the compliance worldwide. Do you want to talk about it right now?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I sent you a
Yeah.
slide that shows global
Yeah.
non-compliances,
Once.
and it's an old metric. It's
Yeah.
2016, but to
Yeah.
be
There it.
honest, it's very much still relevant today, this year, last year, and well, the pattern is the same.
Yeah.
So what we see is, as I already mentioned, India and China with a lot of non-compliances being found, and then you have the mix of other countries has sort of changed. The mix has changed, but it's kind of the same countries in that sort of top group, if you like, of non-compliances being found, and a
Mhm.
vast proportion of those are quality management system related, data integrity related. So I mean that metric is a good one. Is a good one that shows just how much focus there has been on data integrity in the last few years.
Mhm. And the mostly impacted are China, India, or also European and USA. So I see here that 70% is this, so is this all non-compliance here, the data integrity non-compliance, or all non-compliance in general that were in
All
2016?
non-compliances,
Okay, and
all
35%
non-compliances.
of it is data integrity.
Yeah, and I think what's happened is because there's been so much focus on data integrity over the last few years, auditors are a lot more focused on it. It's more in their minds. They are much more savvy in terms of how to go into audits and ask pointed questions, even right down on the system level, not just the quality management system level, but the laboratory system level, the factory system level, to really tease out in an audit, has this system been validated correctly? Has it been configured and tailored with data integrity in mind?
Mhm.
So I think what's happened is that generally more audits have taken place in the last few years. Like year on year, there's more and more audits. Um, And then because of the focus on data integrity, therefore we see an increase in the proportion of data integrity findings from the whole.
Okay, and which departments are impacted from those compliance problems the most? So would it be like quality control, manufacturing, in general quality management system, and so on? Or
Yeah,
is it?
all of those. A lot of audit findings are falling under the quality management system banner, but definitely QC, definitely production, where certainly in terms of FDA warning letters, where quality control has been specifically mentioned as the problem. Production has been specifically mentioned as the problem. And then, yeah, more broadly, as the deficiencies in the quality management system. But yeah, it's the picture that you will have shown. The trend remains today, even though that metric is from a few years ago.
So for the people who are not watching and just listening, so we have here a graph or a metric that shows that 35% of all the violations are data integrity violations. And it's quite a huge impact, huge percentage, and that's why it's important really to look into the issues, because it would probably be much harsher in the future. Also, because many companies go through digitalization process, and they go into a digital transformation, and even smaller companies get themselves QMS, and it's really important to understand what's happening, and what does it really mean, data integrity, and what you need to pay attention to, especially like now there are so many technological advances that when you buy some new equipment to the lab, so probably most of it has records the data, and you can export the data, you can maybe change the data, and you really need to understand what actions you need to take to make sure that you are compliant with the regulations.
Sure, absolutely. And there was another slide that I sent you, Jan, and we talked about. Is the fraud triangle.
Mm-hmm.
We numbered it as slide 5.
Okay, so we have
So
here a triangle that says pressure, opportunity, rationalization.
yeah, so clearly there will always be pressure in a workplace, and then rationalization is the human mind, and quality culture comes into play with rationalization. People doing the right thing, people justifying their actions, maybe choosing to do the wrong thing. But the one that is really important to talk about with respect to data integrity is opportunity. And what we see with modern, sophisticated software packages that are really geared for pharma use is we see in those that we can tailor the settings, we can configure those software packages to force human behavior. So what we do in terms of people's ability to falsify data, to fabricate reports, all of those terrible things that have happened, through software controls, we can reduce the opportunity.
Mm.
We take the opportunity away from the individual by funneling their behavior. So, we have procedures as well, but procedures rely on the users doing the right thing. But through a good software configuration, we can force users to use that software in a particular way, in the most compliant way. So yeah, that I thought that was worth mentioning at that point. That and it goes back to what I was saying before about the sophistication of software
Mhm.
in the last few years. Vendors are really, vendors that sell a lot to the pharmaceutical industry. They're really getting their software packages to a point now where they can be really made to be compliant once the settings are configured properly.
Let's talk about the most important definitions. So, what is really data integrity? So, it is a really big word. So, what's behind it?
Yeah, it's really, I think, very useful to think about data integrity on the process and system level. Um, so what we're saying with a process having good data integrity, and most definitions that you'll find out there, whether it's from the FDA, the MHRA, PICS, GAMP, the definition is pretty much the same. The data is complete, consistent, accurate, while that data is in play, so throughout the data lifecycle. And then, so if you look at like the World Health Organization definition and also the FDA definition in their data integrity Q&A, they kind of take it a little bit further and they start to talk about Alcoa as well. So that the data is complete, consistent, and accurate throughout its life cycle, but also that the data has the qualities of Alcoa. So that's a useful acronym that I'm sure a lot of your viewers will be aware of. It's an important acronym when we talk about data integrity, that the data has certain attributes, that the data is attributable. So who did it? It's legible, so the data is clearly presented. It's contemporaneous, which is a great word to use in the pharma industry. You know, when it was done, that the data is traceable, so attributable and contemporaneous. Those two are, you know, we start to think about audit trails, who did it, when, that the data is original, and we'll come on to a bit more about metadata and dynamic data in a little while, I guess, and that the data is accurate as well. All of those things really must be there for data to be described as having good data integrity. And that can be taken a little bit further as well. You know, you hear people talking about Alcoa Plus. So it's all of those things that I said, plus a few more. Things like complete, that the data is complete, consistent, enduring, that it's readily available, and we can really add. I've seen, guidance documents and people talking about Alcoa Plus where they add loads of things. It's really those attributes that the data has that make it suitable data. Suitable, I mean, in terms of data that is sort of worthy of being associated with a medicinal product. I mean, ultimately, again, we go back to patient safety. You know, for a medicinal product, the data, whether it's test data, manufacturing records, it's got to be true. We have to be able to demonstrate that the ability of the user, whether it's in the factory, the laboratory, the ability of the user to adulterate, manipulate that data is really at a minimum.
Which parameter is the most difficult to adhere to, or which ones usually fall through and are the most difficult to make sure that they are compliant?
Good question. um, okay, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind there is, although I've talked about um, how much the software packages have really come on in the last few years in their sophistication and the ways that they can be configured to be good compliant software packages. A lot, quite a lot of the vendors out there are still not really quite there. You know, the software packages are still quite deficient and don't really have the features that you would want to see for a pharmaceutical software app.
Is it the reason that the packages are not good enough because many uh, of the equipment is not dedicated for pharma. It's analytical equipment, or it's used for in universities and in manufacturers for raw materials that are not pharmaceuticals, and it's just the packages, the security, and so on. It's not there because the manufacturers just maybe don't input enough resources because maybe the pharma is not big enough of a client for it, or what is the reason for that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've seen that before from a couple of vendors where the market share of their products in terms of pharma use it could be 10%. So they've just not invested the resource, whether it's money, time, programming, um, to really, as you've iterated, uh, to get those software packages fit for pharma use. That's certainly one thing. And also, there are quite a lot of vendors where their products are really more geared for research. Historically, used for in more of the molecular biology, cell biology lab systems is what I'm thinking of in terms of what I've worked on, where really the vendors um, they just do not or have not operated within the pharmaceutical territory before, uh, or they're only just starting to the last couple of years, so they're sort of lagging behind. That's really what's going on with. So in terms of which one is the most difficult to achieve, you were talking about Alcoa. Um, I wouldn't pick out one. I would say it can be a real challenge to set systems up um, to get good data integrity when you have those software deficiencies. So it's kind of all of the Alcoa things, really. It, it can be difficult to achieve when you're kind of working with software that's not great. I
Mm.
mean, there's ways to compensate for that through procedural controls. There are certain things you can do with Windows um, or whatever other operating systems are in play. Um, to restrict the PC, um, to prevent people from accessing key system files through the C drive. All those sorts of things. Um, so yeah, the biggest challenge for me, certainly the last few years, has been deficient software packages, where they've just not been written in such a way that really allows you to tailor, configure as you would really want to.
And so, what is the workaround? Should the companies, before they buy equipment, really make sure that it is compliant? Can it be that there are no alternative for a certain equipment, or would it be like let's say too expensive? So, what stops companies to really choose the right equipment that would answer all all the requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. Before any money spent, any capital expenditure process is gotten into. Um, yeah, absolutely. Companies, users, they must be careful what they buy. Um, there is a tendency amongst users of systems to really focus on the capabilities of the system in terms of the capabilities that are not compliant. So they're just the raw performance. Um, what I mean by that is, how easy is it to use? How good is it in my factory operating this vessel? How good is it in the laboratory for doing my HPLC assay? From purely from a usability perspective, users are very much I found focused on that, as you can understand, because they've got to, their focus is on getting the work
Hmm.
done. Um, and sometimes, yeah, when things are being systems are being purchased, the compliance elements can all too easily be overlooked. Um, Even to the point where has been known where systems are rejected and sent back because the software just is so deficient that no amount of configuration or tailoring can get you to a point of acceptable compliance. Absolutely, URS, uh, design qualification, pilot study. You know, before uh, companies buy systems, they should really uh, demo, whether that's going to a vendor's facility, having the vendor come to you. I mean, ideally, the best thing is get, if we think about a laboratory system, get the vendor to bring you one. Have it in your lab for 4, 5, 6 weeks. If they're serious about selling you one, then quite often they're willing to do that. There's no substitute for hands-on assessment.
Is there a lack of risk analysis that people lack maybe the understanding what they should look for, and they don't take it in account when they do the risk analysis for the equipment?
Yeah, yeah, and amongst users there is that, and also a lack of knowledge amongst users as to what features really need to be in a software package um, to then facilitate compliant use and good data integrity. Um, Certainly, uh, factory people, laboratory people, quite often I found they could do with a bit of extra training. No disrespect to them. um, a bit of extra training um, to really know what features there need to be in software um, to allow a good compliant configuration to be teased out.
Hmm. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I think also with data integrity, so we have several problems. We have like direct intentional falsifications that people can do. Then we have maybe a lack of technical skills and awareness and competence. But I think it probably comes together when there is one smart guy who researched the system and played with it, and he suddenly found a way to falsify it, while his managers are completely not aware about this problem. Uh, so it's probably one of the issues that there should be a system owner that really knows the system from A to Z and really uh,
Yeah.
talks to the manufacturer and makes sure that everything is covered. Otherwise, somebody will definitely find some loopholes or find some settings that were not covered that maybe some other management team are not aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's those people who are good at studying software, um, finding the weaknesses, the back doors. Um, it's those people that you really want studying your software.
Mhm.
To put it bluntly, um, those kinds of people really make for good validators, good trainers, and good process owners, system owners. Um, they can be very difficult to find, though. Um, to have. So if we think about laboratory systems, you really need somebody who has a laboratory background, so they can put the software and its use, the system use into context. That they can think about the system from the user's perspective, and they thoroughly understand the workflow, what the system's for. But also to have that person who's quite IT aware as well, and also has the validation skills and the maybe the audit experience as well really helps, because it's really when you're sat in an audit and the auditor says, okay, talk me through the validation of this system, show me the configuration, talk me through the configuration. And it does happen, a lot of companies don't really get that or haven't had that system level audit yet, but I've been at a couple of companies where they have, and not just customer audits, regulatory audits. So, yeah, having the right pair of eyes on a software when it's being assessed is absolutely crucial, and there is no substitute for that hands-on assessment. Sometimes the vendor will say, "Well, here's the brochure," and they maybe answer some questions about the software in an email that allows you to decide whether it's got the right features or not. But really, it's not until someone, like we've described, gets their hands on the software that you can really stress test it, really
Yeah.
explore it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's crucial, really.
Exactly. So yeah, usually in the software, you usually have the QA. When you develop a software, you have the QA that what they do, they basically look for bugs and the problems with the system. And I think maybe it's what's a bit like it's sometimes that somebody with more software skills, more understanding that comes and just uh, plays with the system to see what he can break with it, with the intention to really stress it, as you say. And I'm not sure if it's really done, because I think that people when they buy equipment, they do the user requirements, and they review it, and they, as you said, they just want to get the work done, so they don't think about data integrity. So the lab manager, when he buys the equipment, they probably don't let people play with it beforehand for a few days, few weeks to see the vulnerabilities for the system. So should this
Yeah.
change from your perspective?
Um, yeah, I think, the sort of systems we're thinking about when we talk about this pharmaceutical industry, none of those systems are really cheap. Some of them can be relatively cheap, but they're all still pretty big money.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, got to be careful what you buy. Uh, why spend a big chunk of money on something that's not ever going to really be good enough? Um, and also, important to think about what that system might look like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. Is the vendor going to be supporting it that long? Are there going to be software updates, software support? Is that going to be there? So there's all the functional stuff, but then there's all the vendor support to think about as well. Um, but really, it's not to not to say that the usability of a system must come secondary to the compliance of the system. It's really a balancing act. So what's crucial at that stage, at that purchasing stage, is that uh, the compliance people or person, whether they work in validation or quality IT function, or whether they're a senior uh, laboratory person or a lab manager who's quite good with IT and software, they really need to work closely at that stage with the users, um, because it's a joint decision. The systems have to be usable, efficient, but also the compliance features need to be there. So those sorts of purchasing decisions should really be uh, a team effort, and also not forgetting IT as well, because modern systems, quite often we have to consider uh, the fact that the database may be on the server. Uh, compatibility with the business Windows setup needs to be considered. Some companies are using virtualized PCs, Citrix servers, and things like that. Is the software compatible? You could, if you're not careful, a pharma company end up purchasing something that isn't even compatible with your IT infrastructure. So it has to be a joint decision. And, capital expenditure processes should have the relevant sections so that those people are consulted at the purchasing stage.
Exactly. So involve also the IT when you do the purchase and the risk analysis and so on. So, as I always say, when you do risk analysis, always work with a team of people from various departments. And when you buy equipment, IT must be sitting at the table because they should know if the system is compatible, if it can be harmonized with other systems. And generally, I think when you buy systems today, you need to make sure that you can harmonize them with your other QMS systems, that maybe there is some equipment that is maybe a bit more expensive but can automatically synchronize with your other systems beside LIMS and so on. It can save you a lot of time and money in the future. So, and IT can really help with that. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when we think about interface with LIMS, the way that the company wants to move in the future, can the software move with that vision? Yeah, absolutely. Compatibility, future proofing needs to be considered. And it's like, for example, a software package, and I've seen this before, a software package could be absolutely great in virtually all respects, usability and with many of the things that you would like to see uh, in terms of function. So things like configurable user roles, e-signatures, um, the ability to administrate away from the lab, so having the user management properly separated out so that the lab users can't get in there. But then I've seen it where software packages have all of those things, but then you look at the audit trail, and the audit trail could be terrible. And it's, you can end up in situations where it can be a bit of a shame because if the audit trail was just better, for example, it could have been something that company could have purchased. And then sometimes the audit trail's fine, but then the user roles aren't configurable enough, so you can't really prevent users from doing certain actions that they shouldn't really be able to do, and so on. So yeah, and this already goes back to what you were saying about deciding what to buy. You've got to be so careful, and there are so many software functions to consider that really you've got to get your hands on the software.
Okay.
Really have a good click around, spend some time with it, and really know where it's good, where it's not good, and then make a purchasing decision based on that.
Okay. So when you buy equipment, what you really need to consider. So how does a good data integrity process or workflow looks like? So you buy an
Yeah,
equipment, what do you need to take into account? What must the equipment, the software do?
yeah. So I guess if the workflow isn't there, if you can never get the workflow that you want, it doesn't. It's finished at that stage, isn't it? So it's important to be very clear at the URS stage. What do we want this system to do? And make sure that all of those things are there, I find it quite helpful to actually have, and this is an approach that I've used a few times in the past, to actually have a separate URS, hardware and software. So, you can have all of your, say, laboratory instrument performance requirements and physical requirements for that laboratory instrument in one URS, and then all of the software requirements in another one, and also the IT infrastructure requirements as well. And it keeps it nice and neat and separate, because some URS can be very messy and also can be very sparse as well. So, what I mean by that is, in terms of software URS, quite often what you'll see is kind of like one requirement, that the software must be 21 CFR Part 11 compatible or compliant, and that's it. Not enough. There needs to be much more granularity. It's not just about electronic records and electronic signatures, which is obviously 21 CFR Part 11, although that's obviously very important. The template URS that I have, that I created just for software, there's like 32 individual requirements. Configurable user roles, the infrastructure compatibility stuff, electronic signatures, the tests are laboratory tests, factory processes, that once that process has gone to completion, the data is locked and can't be edited, that the audit trails are sufficient and secure, and it goes on and on. If URS is good, then really does put you on the front foot in terms of buying the right thing.
Yeah, it's quite funny to put just one requirement, 21 CFR Part 11, because as we mentioned, not all manufacturers are pharma dedicated. It means that you tell them, okay, I want it compliant, but that doesn't mean that they have their own experts that are good enough to know each and single requirement that you just mentioned. And that's a good idea to really list all the requirements, and really it's a very important also for your own checklist during the validation.
And always look at multiple vendors if possible. Some systems are so specialized that there might only be one vendor, but quite often there are many to choose from. So for a chromatography data system software, for example, look at a few. Decide which one you like best from a usability point of view, but also really drill into the compliance features as well. Businesses should really look at what's available and not just go with the one that's cheapest, not just go with the one that you're familiar with, that sort of brand loyalty. The instrument is similar to the one we had before, so we just buy that one. Really got to do a lot of research to buy the right thing. Because ultimately in that audit situation, and in terms of patient safety, you've got to have the best you can afford. The pharmaceutical game is an expensive one to be in, and the right controls must be there to ensure patient safety. So companies always have to consider budget, of course, and then in terms of configuration and validation of systems, and then ongoing maintenance of systems as well. Sometimes companies sort of bulk at the expense of having these systems, people working on these systems to configure and validate, and then ultimately to maintain. And actually, maintaining systems once they're configured and validated and put into routine use, having that really good process ownership of systems after they've been rolled out for routine use, that's where I see a lot of companies falling short, because there seems to be this misconception sometimes that, okay, we've spent the money, we've bought really good software, we had these clever people working on it, it's been configured to be efficient, the workflow's brilliant, the users love it, it's got all the compliance features, but then afterwards there's nobody maintaining the system or doing periodic self-inspections to make sure that no one's changed any of the validated configuration settings. Getting out the configuration document and checking that all of the settings still match a year later or 2 years later, and having people as the point of contact for vendors to consider patches, hot fixes, version updates of software. Do you have the software version that is the best one available for you at the moment? All of that sort of stuff. So it's an involved process to buy, validate, and roll out and maintain systems with good data integrity, for sure. But really, there's no excuse for not doing it now, because everybody knows that the software out there is sophisticated enough to give you quite often sophisticated enough to give you the data integrity that is expected in the pharmaceutical industry now.
So you mentioned that people neglect sometimes the maintenance and the review of the software life cycle, and they don't look into it. And so usually it lies on the QA department to do the audit and make sure that all the systems are maintained. So from your perspective, if a company knows that they have neglected the reviews of the softwares, what steps should the quality assurance department take in order to review all their equipment and make sure that it's compliant?
Data governance is absolutely key. So, and certainly if I was an auditor, sorry about the siren there. It wasn't me. Pretty much the first thing I would ask is, please, can I see your data governance policy?
Mhm. Can you elaborate a
And
bit about the concept?
yeah, so really, okay, there's data integrity, but there's also data governance. So if we think, we've talked about systems a lot so far, and really data integrity is concerned with the quality of the data in that sort of process level, that system level. Data governance is more everything, all of the controls and measures that you have to govern how data is treated within your company. It's really more about the quality management system and quality culture as well. And a data governance policy should be quite clear and set out how you approach the control, the generation, the control, the life cycles, how effectively how data is managed within your company. And that should be in a policy. And it's surprising how many pharma companies do not have a data governance policy. It's quite a shock, actually. You've got to have one. got to have one, and it would be the first thing I would ask to see. Like I said, if the data governance policy is good, and if people are thoroughly trained in that policy and everyone's thinking, in terms of the quality culture, if everybody's thinking this in the same way with regards to good data management, then everything kind of, all the good stuff kind of flows from there, including all the things we talked about the correct way to purchase things, to get good systems. Good SOPs come as well. Employee awareness, the quality culture then comes. Without a clear and well-defined, a well-documented data governance policy, companies often end up doing the wrong things.
Mhm. So this review in the life cycle should be already in the data governance policy then.
Yeah, it should be a section within that policy, and maybe it could point to more specialized documents, work instructions, SOPs that would instruct in how that periodic review of a system is to be done, and what forms need to be used, who needs to be involved in that process. Because quite often, it's the lab users, the factory users, the IT, to check that the automated backups have been executed successfully over a period of time. From the user's point of view, that there's no terrible usability issues. From a process owner point of view, I guess we should talk a little bit, Jan, about process ownership, actually.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It's important part, and it's important, to have someone with this responsibility.
Yeah, and to really have dedicated people for that, and those people can come from different sources. What I mean by that is sometimes process ownership, including the periodic reviews of system use, and making sure that the validated configuration is still there. If there have been any changes to the validated configuration, that those have been managed under change control. All of that good stuff, like I said, the backups have been done. The a review of audit trails to make sure that there's nothing in there that's what's happened there. Has that been explained? That doesn't look normal. Stuff like that in the audit trail. All of those things really need to be managed by someone or a group of people that really have some focus on it. Not somebody who's just asked to, by the way, could you just do a bit of that as well? Those people can be amongst the users, and some people would probably react to that and say, no, you can't have the users reviewing their own systems. Well, they can be involved in that process, maybe not manage the whole thing. It's really a cross-functional effort. The people that end up being good process owners are, as we said earlier, the people that kind of make good validators. It's the people that have got the background in terms of the system, they've maybe used it on the user level before, they've got the QA experience, some validation experience, they're quite IT savvy. They make good process owners. It's really having somebody or a group of people that can read that configuration document and thoroughly understand it, every single detail, and can act as good contacts for the vendors as well, for software updates, maintenance, reporting of issues, troubleshooting, procedural, improving procedures where necessary, to have to receive feedback from the users, so that the users are given the opportunity to say, we don't actually like this thing that you did in a configuration. It's not. Could we change this? And to make those incremental changes if necessary. Process ownership. It can sit with. Where I've seen it work best is when it sits with a quality function. Might not be pure QA in terms of what most people think of, in terms of batch release, uh, managing dossiers of products, management of the quality management system of CAPAs and change controls. Really, it sits best as a sort of a sister function. Sometimes it's called QAIT. So it can sort of be a sort of a sister department to the main QA team, or sometimes it's a sister department to the IT department. It doesn't really matter too much, but what's really important is to have those dedicated process owners.
Okay. And so let's say we have a smaller company and they still don't have a data governance policy, and they're not sure if all their systems are compliant, and they haven't put it on their audit agenda because maybe they don't have enough specialists. So what are the best resources for people who start in this area of expertise, and they need to do an internal audit, or they need to validate such a system? What are the best resources?
Well, certainly watching things like like you produce, yeah. Absolutely, look out there and see what should we be doing as the gold standard. Go to data integrity seminars, CSV meetings, seminars. The GAMP forums are good. Read all the guidance. There's an awful lot of data integrity guidance out there. Whether it's the FDA in 2018 put out a really good Q&A on data integrity. The MHRA put out a two-part data integrity guidance in 2016, and then brought it up to date in 2018. There's a GAMP good practice guide specifically about data integrity. The PICS guidance is excellent. Read all of that. Build up a picture of how good data management could be done within your company, and where resources is in short supply. Put the best people that you have on it, with that sort of combined skill set that we talked about. You may not have the ideal person or people, but at least if you can demonstrate that you're on that path to good process ownership, and you can demonstrate that you have gone through processes that ensure that you purchase the right thing, that you set systems up in the right ways, that you have data integrity training at your company, whether it's an e-learning or someone just in a classroom reading out of their notes, better than none.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then it's smaller companies usually have less systems as well, so that helps. And actually, sometimes it's the smaller companies that can really do the really good stuff, like having LIMS interface. So for example, a smaller company may just have one product. They may have one laboratory instrument or a couple of laboratory instruments to do the QC testing, and a LIMS system. And they may just do the same tests day in, day out, over and over. And for companies like that, LIMS interface is much more of a realistic proposition. Or in the case of a factory system, interface with a factory database, because it's simpler to implement because of the nature of the company's work. Larger companies with multiple system types, it gets more complicated. So actually, smaller companies often do better than the bigger ones.
Mhm. Probably less politics, and they have a better overview over their equipment. And as you said, the less systems, and it means it's easier in the end when you have less systems. And probably the newer companies, the younger companies, they have also um, uh, it's also good that they probably are buying the newer equipment, and they're not using equipment that is 20, 30 years old, and it's much easier to qualify and validate than an older equipment that doesn't have those software packages that you mentioned.
Yeah, and that's certainly true. And also, in terms of companies keeping equipment for too long, that's also an issue.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's a misconception that you know if we don't if we don't change this system for a modern one, then we don't have to worry about all of that data integrity stuff because our system isn't capable of that uh, level of control
Mhm.
anyway. Is it really an excuse for uh, it's burying your head in the sand, really, isn't it? And do you want to be in a situation where you're saying to an auditor, well, our system's 12 years old, uh, therefore we don't have to be concerned about electronic signatures or having really effective data integrity controls? It's not an excuse, really. Auditors know, regulators know that what's out there, what's available, what's a good factory system, what's a good uh, infrared spectrophotometer. Um, then they're clever people. Um, so there's nowhere to hide really in this day and age of sophisticated systems. And like I said, all the guidance is there. You know, pleading ignorance isn't an option either. uh, so yeah, and ultimately it comes back to patient safety. You know, it sounds so simple, but just to companies do well to ask themselves the question. Would with all the systems and the processes that have gone into this medicinal product, would I be happy for one of my family members to take this medicine?
Mm.
Patient
Mm.
safety is the bottom line.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there are companies that say, okay, we have equipment that is older, and we don't have to do this and this because it doesn't output data, it doesn't keep data. But let's say you have a new equipment that does it, but it also allows you to change data. So how much acceptance do auditors have if you say them, okay, we know that you can change the data here, but our procedure said that you document it manually? Would it save you issue? Because they say, okay, it's the same as working with an old system. We just manually document everything, and we know that you can change the data. It has no backup, there is no audit trail, but we just copy it manually.
Yeah, so those obviously the gold standard is having the forcing the user's behavior. That's the gold standard, by having the restrictions on the PC, the software, and to have all of the good stuff, the audit trails and so on, and the inability for the users to do anything bad. That's the gold standard. The reality, of course, as you've iterated, is quite often different, and there's quite a lot of use of hybrid systems, whereby, okay, the bulk of the process is executed with software, and it can be very good software with all the compliance features that you would want, but quite often there is still a paper element, whether it's a manufacturing formula, manufacturing record, where details from that are manually entered into the software. When we think about laboratory systems, okay, you might have the software telling the laboratory instrument what to do, and processing the data and reporting the data. But what about the preparation of the samples to analyze on the system? Still done in a lab notebook, or sometimes an electronic lab notebook, or a preparation worksheet. Wherever those hybrid systems exist, traceability is the key. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because what really is needed, where hybrid system, well, in any system anyway, but certainly especially where hybrid systems are used, wherever there's a paper element, is good data standards. So, for example, for a laboratory system, the preparation of the solutions to put into vials to inject onto the instrument to do the analysis, that preparation worksheet should have a unique reference. That unique reference should find its way into the software to link it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all tied together.
Yeah. So you don't. So you cannot just throw away the paper. So it's every page of it is traced. So you cannot just say, "Oh, okay, this page is missing, and I don't know why."
Yeah. For records to be complete is crucial. To have traceability, so wherever paper documents are used, they have unique identifiers, and that those identifiers are included in the software. Quite often, samples have unique identifying numbers. They can also be used in the software, so it leaves no doubt what samples have been tested, by who, when, why, what methodology has been used. If any automated calculations have been performed on the data, have those calculations been validated? Who can change those calculations? Are they locked? So, really, we're talking about the output of any process, whether it's factory or laboratory, the data that comes out, that you have to be able to demonstrate that there is sufficient control in the system, in the process, so that you can state that output is true. And there's various different ways, it's about the software, it's about the quality culture, it's about good procedures. it's the whole, it's all of it together.
We need so we have data integrity, and people must show that it complies, and they must do the validation phases, and it's a very crucial part. And I think it would be great really to talk about it a bit deeper in another talk, which we will for sure make. And I want to thank you very much, Daniel, for that great talk, that information. And let me ask you, if people want to reach you and ask you more question about the issues, how can they reach you and contact you?
My company, Data Integral, we have a website. So if you Google Data Integral, you'll find us. You can get in touch via the website. Our business email address is enquiries@dataintegral.co.uk. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. We have a company Facebook. There's another Data Integral, a German company. So perhaps search on Data Integral Limited, which identifies us as the UK company. Any questions? Any recommendations for good guidance documents to read and so on? I'm happy to respond.
Okay, perfect. So Daniel Milek, thank you very much, and we'll see each other.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Good to talk to you, and look forward to talking about CSV with you soon.
Perfect. Thank you for watching and listening to this episode of the Qualitalks podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider sharing it, and don't forget to subscribe, stay compliant, and see you in the next one.